Women in Herstory. Okay. Badass women in Herstory. Althea Gibson, born August 25th, 1927. She passed September 28, 2003. She was an American tennis player and professional golfer, and one of the first black athletes to cross the color line of international tennis. In 1956, she became the first African American to win a Grand Slam title for the French Championships. The following year, she won both Wimbledon and the U.S. Nationals, precursor of the U.S. Open. Then won both again, in 1958, and was voted Female Athlete of the Year by the Associated Press in both years. In all, she won 11 Grand Slam tournaments, 5 single titles, 5 double titles, and 1 mixed doubles title. Gibson was inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame and the International Women's Sports Hall of Fame. She is one of the greatest players who ever lived, said Bob Ryland, a tennis contemporary and former coach of Venus and Serena Williams. Martina couldn't touch her. Martina Navratilova couldn't touch her. I think she beat the Williams sisters. In the early 1960s, she also became the first black player to compete on the Women's Professional Golf Tour. At a time when racism and prejudice was widespread in sports and society, Gibson was often compared to Jackie Robinson. Her road to success was a challenging one, said Billie Jean King, but I never saw her back down. To anyone, she was an inspiration because of what she was able to do at a time when it was enormously difficult to play tennis at all if you were black, said former New York City Mayor David Dinkins. I am honored to have followed in such great footsteps, wrote Venus Williams. Her accomplishments set the stage for my success, and through players like myself and Serena and many others to come, her legacy will live on. Althea Gibson was born on, like I said earlier, August 25th, 1927, in the town of Silver in Clarendon County, South Carolina, to Daniel and Annie Bell Gibson, who worked as sharecroppers on a cotton farm. The Great Depression hit rural Southern families sooner than much of the rest of the country. So in 1930, the family moved to Harlem as part of the Great Migration, where Althea's 3 sisters and brother were born. Their apartment was located on a stretch of 143rd Street between Lenox Avenue and 7th Avenue that had been designated by a police athletic league play area. During daylight hours, it was barricaded so the neighborhood children could play organized sports. Gibson quickly became proficient in paddle tennis, and by 1939, at the age of 12, she was the New York City Women's Paddle Tennis Champion. Gibson quit school at the age of 13 and, using the boxing skills taught to her by her father, engaged in a life of what she would later refer to as street fighting, girls basketball, and watching movies. Fearful of her father's violent behavior, after dropping out of school, she spent some time living in a Catholic protective shelter for abused children. In 1940, a group of Gibson's neighbors took up a collection to finance a junior membership and lessons at the Cosmopolitan Tennis Club in the Sugar Hill section of Harlem. Well, that's why they're called the Sugar Hill Gang. At first, Gibson didn't like tennis, a sport she thought was for weak people. I kept wanting to fight the other player every time I started to lose a match, she said. In 1941, she entered and won her first tournament, the American Tennis Association New York State Championship. She won the ATA National Championship in the girls division in 1945 and 1944. And after losing in the women's final in 46, won her first of 10 straight national ATA women's titles in 1947. I knew that I was an unusual, talented girl through the grace of God, she wrote. I don't need to prove myself. I didn't need to prove that to myself. I only wanted to prove it to my opponents. So her ATA success drew the attention of Walter Johnson, a Lynchburg, Virginia physician who was active in the African-American tennis community. Under Johnson's patronage, he would later mentor Arthur Ashe as well. Gibson gained access to more advanced instruction and more important competitions, and later to the United States Lawn Tennis Association, USLTA, later known as the USTA. In 1946, she moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, under the sponsorship of another physician and tennis activist, Hubert A. Eaton, and enrolled at the racially segregated Williston Industrial High School. In 1949, she became the first black woman and the second black athlete after Reginald Ware to play in the USTA's National Indoor Championships, where she reached the quarterfinals. Later that year, she entered Florida A&M University on a full athletic scholarship and was a member of the Beta Alpha chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. So despite her growing reputation as an elite level player, she was effectively barred from entering the Premier America tournament. In response to intense lobbying by ATA officials and retired champion Alice Marble, who published a scathing open letter in the magazine American Lawn Tennis, Gibson became the first black player to achieve an invitation to the Nationals, where she made her Forest Hills debut. Forest Hills, shouts to J. Cole, debut a few days after her 23rd birthday. So although she lost narrowly in the second round in a rain-delayed 3-set match to Louise Bro, the reigning Wimbledon champion and former U.S. national winner, her participation received extensive national and international coverage. So this is, quote, "No Negro player, man or woman, has ever set foot on one of these courts," wrote journalist Lester Rodney at the time. Quote, "In many ways, it is even a tougher personal Jim Crow busting assignment than was Jackie Robinson's when he first stepped out of the Brooklyn Dodgers dugout." So in 1951, she won her first international title. Later that year, became one of the first black competitors at Wimbledon, where she was defeated in the third round by Beverly Baker. So let's see. She just keeps going up and up and up. She became a professional. She said, "Being the queen of tennis is all well and good, but you can't eat a crown. Nor can you send the IRS a thrown clip to their tax forms. The landlord and grocer and tax collector are funny that way. They like cold cash. I reign over an empty bank account, and I'm not going to fill it by playing amateur tennis." She didn't win that much money when she was playing. Her professional tennis career was going nowhere. She did try some entertainment industry. She had a song, an album. She performed 2 songs on the Ed Sullivan Show, but sales were disappointing. In 1964, at the age of 37, she became the first African-American woman to join the Ladies Professional Golf Association, the LPGA. Married a tennis player. She broke records. She came along during a difficult time in golf, getting the support of a lot of people, and quietly made a difference. In 1976, she made it to the finals of the ABC television program Superstars, finishing first in basketball, shooting, and bowling, and runner-up in softball throwing. She attempted a golf comeback in 1987 at age 60. In 1972, she began running Pepsi-Cola's National Mobile Tennis Project, which brought portable nets and other equipment to underprivileged areas in major cities. She ran multiple other clinics and tennis outreach programs over the next 3 decades, and coached numerous rising competitors, including Leslie Allen and Zena Garrison. "She pushed me as if I were a pro, not a junior," wrote Garrison in her 2001 memoir, "I owe the opportunity I received to her." In the early 70s, she began directing women's sports and recreation for the Essex County Parks Commission in New Jersey. Her coach during her peak tennis years. Oh, she married her coach during her peak tennis years. That marriage ended in divorce. After 5 years, she had no children. 92, she got a stroke. Ongoing medical expenses depleted her financial resources, leaving her unable to afford her rent on medication. But they raised money and raised nearly $1 million in donations from around the world. Thank God. She survived a heart attack in 2003, but then she died later that year from complications following respiratory and bladder infections. Her body was interred in the Rosedale Cemetery in Orange near her first husband, Will Darvin. Wow, what a badass woman in Herstory, y'all. Seriously. Okay. This has been the Friday podcast. And I'm recording these out of order. So I'll do my conclusion. I'll do the series review. And I'll do the news in a little bit. So I'm about to take a break. Thank y'all. Love it. I love y'all, baby.